that, you recorded some key video for a very cool project that you put out into the world last year. So maybe while we're waiting for a few minutes for people to join, what was that cool project?
Yeah, so I filmed the beginning part of a poetry masterclass in Ireland on the cliffs of Annestown. You can see the ocean behind me, and it's one of the best things I've ever done. I created this whole masterclass for poets where the first half of the class, I teach you how to create your most powerful poetry. And then the second half is I teach you exactly step by step how to get your poems published in lit magazines and journals, like all over the world. And I give you sample query letters, everything that's worked for me. I give you lists of journals with submission deadlines. I give you kind of the ins and outs of this whole industry that I learned the hard way in the last 15 years of what to do, what not to do. And yeah, I was like, you know what? I've had such success. I want to pass that on and help other poets get their dream of being published. So I
Awesome.
have that whole poetry masterclass. It's in the link in my bio. So if you, after this class, head to my bio, just click on that link and you'll be able to get it. So
All right. Well, I think we have some critical mass now. We've got like 70 people registered. Not everybody shows up. Maybe we'll get half of them. Who knows? I am hoping to download this and rebroadcast it as well, give it a little edit. But Morgan, thank you very much for joining us. Morgan and I have known each other since I reached out to her on Instagram when I was self-publishing my very first book, Canvas. There it is. And I had some key questions about I think at the time it was Amazon KDP and Instagram and Ingram Spark, and I just had some really just basic question about how it worked. But before we even get to that, we've talked about this quite a bit, Morgan. Why have you chosen to go down the self-publishing path? And then I'll answer the same question myself too.
yeah, I love this question. So self-publishing is not for the faint of heart. It is so much work, but it is the most worthwhile thing I've ever done with my life. Like, you are not the same person on the other side of self-publishing your book than you are when you started. And it gives you so much creative control over your book, which is really important. So your book is your baby, right? And you want to be able to have the cover that you want, the creative vision that you want, to sell it where you want to sell. And you have all that control when you self-publish, and not a lot of that control when you go the traditional publishing route. And then another great thing that I'm just so grateful for now, years later, because Barefoot and Running came out in 2021. So I'm like years through this process, but I'm so glad that I have the rights to my book. And
Mm-hmm.
it's huge. And I've had, because my book was really amazingly successful, and I've had several publishing companies try to email me because they want to buy the rights to my book. And I'm like, there's no way you can offer me anything like kind of what I have, owning my own rights. I get all of my royalties just to me, and that's something that you own forever. So it's been really awesome.
Yeah. For me, it was my first two books. It was basically I had no choice. I've been writing poetry since I was 10 and for over 4 decades. And then a good friend of mine who ended up being the cover artist, the cover art is over my shoulder over there. The cover artist for my book said, really, you should really publish. And so that was the little nudge I needed, and the pandemic hit. And so then I got serious about getting my work published. Well, the previous to that, I had just put my work out on my website and I shared it with friends and family. Well, that basically took publishing it traditionally off the table because it had been published on a website. So it wasn't even an option for my first two books to go to a traditional publisher. And my first two books, they were a combination mostly of poems that I had written previously, sort of the best of, and then some new material. So that forced me down the self-publishing journey. Now, what I've learned since, with my third book, I had the option. I had a deal from a publisher that I ended up turning down, is the control that Morgan talked about. So in my first book, Canvas, which has this incredible cover, Morgan's going to talk about the importance of covers later, and the original artwork hanging on my wall. I got to work directly with the designer and the artist, and I have total control over all of that. And as I go through my three books, the second one was artwork licensed from a museum. And the third book, which I not only self-published, but did all the design myself based on what I learned working with the designer for my first two books, The third book, I tracked down the artist and worked with them directly for the cover. So it is a lot of work, but I have had total artistic control. And another little thing you get, which is not a little thing, by self-publishing it, you can get review copies very inexpensively, very inexpensively. So to be totally transparent, the review copy for this from Amazon KDP is about $2.30. And so if I have to ship a review copy, I can go into Amazon KDP and ship it through Amazon's global network, or buy a box for myself to use it to open mics. If you go through a traditional publisher, you have to buy the books from them at a discount off of whatever price they decide to sell it for, which you have no control over. So it costs a lot more, and you're going to pay a lot more for shipping. And you can't just sort of pop on and go to KDP and put in an address and send a book out for $2 or so for the cost of the printing, plus maybe $3 to $4 for shipping. That's a huge advantage, plus of all the other things that Morgan mentioned. So Morgan, so now let's zip forward a little bit and talk about the design process, and maybe this leads right on the importance. Why is a cover so important? Because the expression is, don't judge a book by its cover, which is, I think, absurd. Maybe dig into that a little bit. Why is a cover so important?
Yeah, absolutely. Before I get started and dig into this, I want to let everybody know after this call, if you DM me, I will send you this beautiful PDF I just spent the last few days making that has all this information in it so that you don't have to necessarily take notes, and it has some additional extras. So yeah, I'll just email that to you if you DM me after this call, and I'll be happy to send that just for free to you as like a little love letter from one writer to another. But okay, the cover. So unfortunately, our buying decisions are based on two things: the title and the cover. And so one of those things needs to stand out and be special, because think about yourself as a book buyer. You walk into Barnes and Noble, or you're scrolling through Book Talk on TikTok. You are met with so much stimuli. It's so hard to cut through that noise, right? So the only books that will catch your attention, or that you'll click on or add to your cart, or that you'll pick up at the bookstore, are books with awesome covers that draw you in. That's just the reality of it. So without a professional looking cover, you won't even get the chance to have readers click on your book. And then also, one thing I'll cover today is all about Amazon ads. And so if you are successful with Amazon ads, you have to have a great cover, because that's all people are going for. And when you do an Amazon ad, it'll pop up as a sponsored thing at the top of your Amazon search, and people are only seeing your cover. And they're going to click on it and buy it based on literally your cover. So if you don't have a professional cover, you just won't succeed with Amazon ads, unfortunately. So that tool won't be in your tool belt. And then also, like, think about your top favorite authors, and you want your book to look just as professional and just as amazing if it was sitting next to their books, because you're competing. And so you need a professional designer. It's just one of the things, if you're going to hire any professional during this process, please let it be a professional book designer, because that will make just a huge difference. And it might be a cost up front, but you're going to make that back in sales that you wouldn't otherwise have. And that person with the design eye and the special fancy software is just always going to do better than you. Oh, and also I have a little PSA about the platform Fiverr. If you have you heard about that,
Oh
James? The
yes, I
Fiverr platform?
use it. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely.
it's great for a million different creative projects, but what I've noticed on there is there are lots of people selling book covers, design services, and what they're doing is just plugging your author name and your title into this pre-made template that they have for your
Hmm.
genre. And I see that all over Instagram. I see that when I go on the Fiverr marketplace, and I'm like, no, these poor people, they're paying for something that everyone's going to know isn't like a real cover. And your book deserves its own cover. And once you've seen that template over and over on Book Talk, on Instagram, on these book marketplaces online, like, okay, I'm not going to take that book seriously because they've got that same romance template cover that I've seen a million times. So that's like a buyer beware for Fiverr. But if you are looking for a good cover designer, what I did is I contacted a design agency and found out their prices were way too high for me. And I just told them, oh, yep, too rich for my blood. And then they sent me a whole list of designers that they recommend that are like freelancers and cheaper. So, I mean, I really would explore that route. It's just so important. Please, if you listen to one thing, get a professional cover designer. It'll make a huge difference.
So here's what I'm looking at books. If the cover hasn't been thoughtfully designed, it's a warning signal that the author didn't, or the publisher didn't really care too much about this book. They're just pumping it out there.
Right.
When there's thought and care put into the cover design, it tells you something about the quality of the book. Like if an ice cream truck drove up to your house and it was covered with mud and it had rust and there were holes in the side of it, you'd go, I'm not eating that ice cream. You could have the same ice cream truck with the same low quality ice cream, but the beautiful outside, and you're gonna actually think twice. The inside's got to have high quality too. Don't get around. A great cover will not overcome bad content, but it's so sad to have great content undermined by a rapper that's not professional. So how did I find? So my first two books, I used a designer, Zoe Norvell, who I interviewed for a podcast I run, the Viewless Wings Poetry Podcast. Also interviewed Morgan several times. And how did I find my designer? I was starting from zero. I had no idea what I was doing for my first book. Well, I looked inside the cover of a book I really liked the design of, Olivia Gatwood's book, Life of the Party, and I saw the name of the designer, and I just tracked her down. And she was a freelancer who had previously worked at some of the big publishers as an in-house designer, and then she started a freelance business. And I reached out to her, and she agreed to take my project, and I worked with her on my first two books, and she ended up starting something called I think it's called I Need a Book Cover .com, which is a sort of a service for finding designers, freelancers. So I recommend you check that out. I've also interviewed her. And so for my third book, she just wasn't available because she was building this brand new business. I ended up designing, when I had COVID a year and a half ago, a book that I wanted to do for years, a boutique book. Only 50 copies were ever printed, and it's a book of my concert photography. I did the entire design, layout, everything myself in Adobe InDesign, which is the industry standard. It is a major undertaking to get educated on that software. So I would say only if you're super keen technically can you do that. But then once I had the confidence of that book that was sort of low stakes, this book that I care so much about, my most recent book, the interior design, the layout, the combination of original artwork with the poetry, of photography, the design of the book was so important to me. I turned down a traditional publisher because I knew I would lose all of that control. I would lose when it comes out. I would lose the title. I would lose the choice of artwork, everything. I would let go of all of that. And the design was so important to me that I ended up going, and this is all original art that I commissioned, that I ended up doing it myself, but I had the confidence to do so. I could have also gone to a designer. What I would not do is sort of wing it. If you've got beautiful words and lousy design, it will undermine it. One other little point I'll make is come up with an imprint for you can self-publish just using your name. I mask that a bit by using my Viewless Wings Press imprint, which can be whatever name you want. Just make sure it's not taken by somebody. Be careful about that, because that's another thing that can just add to your book appearing traditionally published, even if it's self-published. There are definitely self-published books that are very, very low quality. But if you do the things, and this will lead into my next area of focus, you can create a book as high quality as any publisher. Another part of that, so in addition to which professionals will you want to pay for, pay for one decent, high quality profile photo. You will use it a million times. And for my podcast, when I get submissions from new poets, they almost always have just someone took a photo of them on their iPhone. and it just doesn't look very good. So again, you may not have the financial means to do any of this. You have to be realistic within the constraints of what you can do financially. But for $100, $200 tops, you can get a profile photo that you will use forever, and it just amplifies you. The other thing that is definitely worth paying for is at least a copy editor. And the role of a copy editor is letter perfect. The only typos I've had in my books is where I foolishly made an edit after the copy editor blessed it. And then I learned my lesson. Once the copy editor's done with it, don't touch it. Not super expensive, but a copy editor will go through the book, especially the copy editor I work with, who I interviewed, Brittany Smale in the Bay Area. She just gave me this incredible feedback about my book within the context of poetry, where you can break rules. So copy editors gives you this confidence that you're not going to have that typo that embarrasses you the minute you crack the spine. If you can get an editor, that's great too. I worked with Christina Marie Darling on my last book, who's the Tupelo Press editor, but she also does consulting services outside of that, and that was incredibly valuable. But again, you're each going to have a budget, and these things are going to add on each other. So book design is number one. Copy editor is number two. I would say an editor of the entire content would be number three, but you might get the editor through poetry critique groups and other forms of feedback.
Yeah, I
So,
feel really strongly, I'll just jump in, about the editor for your content, because I've had this happen with a few writers where they hire an editor and all of a sudden they're making so many stylistic changes to your poetry. And I just want to encourage you that if you do hire an editor, take everything that they say through your own filter of your heart and decide whether it's right for you. Because at the end of the day, it's your poetry and you know how best to communicate what you want to say. And poetry is, in my view, like completely and totally sacred, where there is no right or wrong. It's subjective, unlike writing a novel, right? Where things could be PC, the dialogue could be off. Like those are super valid, really important edits. But with poetry, I'm very much like hands off everyone's poetry. Just let them decide what that vision is for each poem. So if you do hire an editor, don't feel pressured to make all
right.
of the edits that they're making. Pass it through your heart, see what feels right.
Absolutely. One of my poems in the Plague Doctor that's been most well received by people, and I really know it's just perfect, doesn't need to be touched. In getting feedback from Christina, I'd say 80% of her feedback I either took or I adapted or I learned from. It was really, really good. But the feedback she made on that poem, I'm like, you can give me all the feedback you want. I'm not touching a dang thing. It's
Yeah.
perfect. Because, an editor is going to have the instinct to find something to. So you have to feedback is a gift, but you don't have to accept every gift. There's some gifts where that's pretty, but it's just not for me. So yes, I think that's terrific advice. So going over to, you've created this beautiful book, whatever path you've taken to get there. Now, as a self-published author, you're on the hook for everything. Here's a little secret, though. With most, especially for poetry, with most books, you are on the hook for marketing yourself anyways, unless you're, Amanda Gorman, who's incredible, where she, has earned an extraordinary team of people. You're really on the hook to do your own promotion anyways. So unless a publisher is bringing that to the table, then what are they bringing you? So Morgan, talk a little bit about what you have learned and done with Amazon ads and other ways of promoting and getting people to pick your book out of the millions of books that are out there.
Yeah. So I have two prongs that I used for promoting my book. One is Instagram, of course. I'm so fortunate to have amazing human beings on here that have been so supportive and went out and bought my book on pre-order and continue to buy my book. So that is a big prong. I know social media can have its kind of toxic side, but it is just super important to lean into that and try to create a positive, loving atmosphere with whatever page you choose to create, because that is an amazing channel to sell your books and get your work out there. And then the second prong that is so helpful is Amazon ads. Make Amazon ads your best friend. It's so important. And what Amazon ads does is it creates a little ad when people search for certain keywords, a little ad of your book up at the top, and it'll say sponsored. It'll have your book cover, your author name, and a small one sentence blurb. And so the goal is to get somebody who's searching for something else to click on that and go to your landing page and go, oh my gosh, add to cart. And what you do through Amazon ads is you bid on keywords. And one of my big tips is with ads and keywords, the more general and more searched a keyword is, the more expensive it is. So for instance, American poetry is something people are typing in all the time in Amazon to find. And if you want to bid on that keyword in order to get your book shown as a sponsored book, you're going to have to pay $2, $3.
Mhm.
And that will eat into your profits real fast because you pay per click, you don't pay per sale. So you're going to have people click on your ad and not ultimately buy your book. So you might spend $20, $30 just to get one sale if you bid on American poetry. But instead, I want you to focus on the more niche keywords, the things that will still get you that sale, but not every author is out there trying to compete. Like
Mhm.
instead of American poetry or women's poetry, choose one of my keywords was Mary Oliver poetry, Joy Harjo poetry, because you know that people that are searching for their books will like my book because I'm basically a daughter of both of those poets. I'm obsessed with them and have grown them into my practice. So I knew people that were searching for Mary Oliver's book might like my book about nature poetry. So that got me sales. But instead of spending $2, $3 per click, I was spending 9 cents, 10 cents. So go where there's less competition and choose those more obscure keywords that will still get you your ideal reader.
You know what? I think you've touched on something, and I'm currently taking a book marketing course. I originally thought of hiring a PR firm, online marketing firm, and it was way too expensive. I knew they weren't overcharging. I just know what it costs, and it's just unrealistic.
Mhm.
But they did offer a much, 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 much less sort of do-it-yourself training method agency, as I believe their name. Training that where we have a small cohort of poets and other. Actually, I'm the only poet and other writers, and we're learning how to market our books ourselves. And one thing that they talk about is over time, figure out what are the characteristics of your audience. So Morgan, you kind of just did that there. That you're the daughter of, metaphorically speaking, of Mary Oliver, and that you want to market yourself with that mindset, so that you're not just, American, like you said, American poetry is such a broad, everything fits under that umbrella. So you're gonna not only are you gonna pay a lot to compete, you're also paying. It's a signal that you're competing. It's a wide swath of books. This can be really hard when your name isn't as established to even with all the other things the boxes checked. So I think having some understanding of who your audience is, which is poets, that's a tricky thing to understand at first. You may not know for sure what your audience is. So as you do open mics and get other forms of feedback, keep in the back of your mind, who are the people that are reading my book and really enjoyed it? And you don't need 1,000 data points. You need a few that can help you understand what your book's audience is. Because if you know what the audience is, then it's easier to target how you're trying to communicate to them. Absolutely.
Yeah, and have an open mind, like you said. As time goes on, your target audience, like you said, might not be who you thought it was. And really look for those clues and adjust. Like I was so convinced my audience was millennial women. And now, years later, I'm like, oh, it's everybody that loves Mary Oliver, everybody that appreciates nature. And so it's kind of evolved. So just have an open mind and be able to pivot your marketing to that ideal reader as it changes over time and as you get more information.
Absolutely, because your readers that love your book are the readers that love your book, not whatever assumptions you have in your mind. So I hadn't heard you talk about that before, Morgan. That's really cool that you went through that evolution. Well, another thing I've got on the list here before, in a little bit, Morgan will talk about the critical pre-sale period, and I'm sure there's lots of interest and comments, questions about that. But who do you go with? Amazon KDP or Ingram or Barnes and Noble Press? I think by default you go with Amazon KDP because of their reach. If you want your book in a local bookstore, which could be a whole long topic by itself, it is highly unlikely that any local, at least no local bookstore that I have talked to, will buy a book, even though they could, through Amazon KDP. They just
Away.
won't do it.
Yeah.
They won't do it. So that's where you have to be on Ingram Spark, which means it's setting up everything twice. Ingram Spark has removed their very annoying tax to set up a book. Thankfully, it used to be $50 to set up a book and then $50 to change it down the road. Really annoying when it's free on the other platforms. They've taken that away. So if you want your book to be distributed through a local bookseller, then you need to jointly list it and set it up on Ingram Spark. And actually, as it turns out, I have examples of all three platforms. So to get a nice hardcover for my first book, which I was so excited about, with a dust jacket and the whole thing, that's on Ingram Spark. So they support that. The hardcover, on, at least for now, on Amazon KDP is doesn't have the dust cup, the dust jacket. This was done on it. This is from Amazon KDP, although I have it co-listed on Ingram Spark. This, I wanted a hardcover of the Plague Doctor, and I ended up choosing Barnes and Noble Press because the black colors pop more than Ingram Spark. So I did not like the quality of Ingram Spark's hardcover, and with Barnes and Noble Press, it just looks great. So, and then finally, I went through the ultimate go around to get this book, which has really vibrant photography. Let me show you a particularly good example of that in here. Where are we here? Yeah, so here we go. So this really vibrant photography that pops, that's full bleed. I went to every single of the platforms. Just another one there, and only actually only Amazon KDP would print it with the quality and the color pop that I got. Barnes and Noble Press and Ingram Spark just couldn't do it. So I think that the answer is Amazon KDP at a minimum, Ingram Spark almost likely a second, maybe Barnes and Noble Press. They're all pretty similar. It is more work. You got to upload it and go through their process, and each one of them has a different process. They have strengths and weaknesses. If you're satisfied with just selling it on Amazon, then just do it on Amazon KDP and don't worry about anything else. It really depends what your goals are.
Yeah, they each have advantages and disadvantages. So my philosophy is definitely do KDP and definitely do Ingram, because there will come a time probably where you're going to want to have your book physically on a shelf in a Barnes and Noble or a bookstore, and you'll already have that set up. And we'll go into pre-sale in a moment, but speaking of advantages, Ingram Spark allows you to pre-sale a whole lot longer.
Yes, that's a really good point. That's how I connected
Yeah.
with you. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
and then KDP for a while there wouldn't even let you pre-sale at all. So they changed that a few years ago. But so there are just all these different advantages and disadvantages. And as you create strategies for selling your book, you're going to want to take advantage of both of those. So I say just do it. All you have to do is set it up once, and then it's in both of those channels for years. It's worth it. Just go for it. I say
Here's
do
a
both.
little detail, which, by the way, Morgan's got a handout for people who've joined. If you DM Morgan, she'll send you a PDF that she's pulled together. When I went through this self-publishing journey several years ago, I wrote a series of articles on viewlesswings.com. So you've already found your way to Viewless Wings. Just go to the web and put .com, and it's the first articles. Or if you Google Viewless Wings self-publishing, you'll find that series of articles. So I wrote like 10 articles on all the different things I learned as I was learning them. Definitely own your ISBN, which is the magic number that attaches to your book. You do that through a service called Bowker, Bowker, and then you can you control that. If the ISBN is controlled by the self-publishing route, that'll constrain your flexibility. So that's another expense. I hate to say it's not thousands of dollars. It's probably $100 or something. You can buy 10 of them and be done for a while. So I think those are some of there's a lot of details that we're not going to be able to get into in this Instagram Live, and we both got handouts that'll help with that, me and the web and more in a PDF. But there are definitely some key things that you want to get right the first time. And you're owning your ISBN is definitely one of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, do not take the ISBN that Amazon just gives you or Ingram assigns you. No, own it. Yeah.
Yeah. So then pre-sales, talk about your experience on pre-sales, Morgan, then I'll share some of my experiences.
Yeah, so I'm so excited to talk about pre-sales because this is the number one thing I see authors that are doing this on their own make the mistake of, because pre-sales are so important if you want to get the visibility and the kind of resume builder of being on best-selling lists. Because every book that you sell during a pre-sale counts towards your first day or first week, depending on which list you're targeting, of sales. So, for instance, Brene Brown, the reason why she's number one on the New York Times bestselling list and sold, 30,000 copies day one of her release date is because she pre-sold for 2 months. So she didn't sell those on day one. She sold those for the last 2 months. Then you get to take all those numbers and it'll boost you up to the top of the list, which is exactly what I did. And so now, like, for the rest of my life, I get to say, like, oh, I'm a best-selling author because I was on the list. No, I just worked my butt off pre-selling, and then I enjoyed that really boost for the first day and the first week that my book was out. So you're going to want a pre-sale, and you can set up your pre-sale timeline in KDP or in Ingram. So specifically, and again, DM me and I'll send you a PDF with all of these timelines. But for Ingram, you can pre-sale up to 365 days in advance, which is way too long, but it's nice to have that flexibility. And then for Amazon, you can sell between 5 and 90 days in advance. And the really magical thing about having a pre-sale period is it allows you that time to just focus on marketing your book. Because before pre-sale, you're going to be working with the designer, you're going to be making final edits, you're going to be doing all these things other than marketing. And then you get this 2 month period, if that's what you choose, or 3 month period or whatever, to just focus on marketing your book, pushing it out on social media, going on podcasts. So it really gives you that dedicated time, which is nice. And then, like I said, shooting you up to the top of those lists is awesome for your career and then also for sales because people are looking at those lists. So you'll get some extra book sales that way too. So pre-sale, pre-sale, pre-sale. Cannot stress it enough. And you can use Amazon ads during your pre-sale period too, which is that's what I did. And it's hard to know because they don't tell you when they give you your book sale numbers exactly where the person that bought your book found you. But I think a lot of my pre-sales came from my Amazon ads because it was significant. And it really, really helped boost my pre-sale. So that all goes hand in hand. If you focus on your Amazon ads during the pre-sale period, that'll help you a lot.
Now, related to kind of ramping up to when you're going to launch your book, once you finish the book, you got the design, you're going to be so anxious to get it out there, and you have to resist the temptation to just toss it out there before you've lined everything up. So that includes, for my first book, how do I have stuff on the back, blurbs, when nobody knows who I am? So I like network like crazy. Morgan was actually one of my blurbs. There you are, right there. One of the very first people to offer me a blurb, and then I tracked down a university press who really liked my book in the University of Chicago, and I was thrilled to get that. So getting initial blurbs for the back of the book, getting initial reviews initially is really hard. It's just assume that if you're unknown and it's first book, this stuff's going to be hard. And your first book is probably not going to be your last book, and you are building up a foundation. I actually had a friend of mine who's done, I think, 14 children's books, and every children's book in the STEM space, and so totally different from poetry. But she just announced this week that after 14 books, she's finally a New York Times best-selling author. And every book she was dreaming of that. It took 14 books for her, and she just stuck with it. And it was like super inspiring. So each book that goes out that you get into the hands of people, there's going to be an indirect effect that happens that you aren't even aware of. So you just have to be, like with everything to do with publishing, patient, and accepting. In terms of getting reviews on Amazon and Goodreads, you just you have to be willing to send out a bunch of review copies. I personally send out physical review copies because for books like this, it's just the design is so important. I will, send out PDFs if that's what people would prefer. But I end up doing a lot of outreach to build up those reviews. It's not something that you can count on unless you're selling millions of books. The number of organic reviews that happen just because is going to be a small subset of the people that buy your book. And that doesn't mean they don't like it. It just means that most people don't take the time to write a review. They read the book and they move on, and they don't think to go back to Amazon. So you have to be proactive about reviews. Don't assume they'll just magically happen unless you're a Stephen King or a John Grisham or a Mary, well, may she rest in peace, Mary Oliver, one of these like poets that is just so iconic that they already have that massive following.
Yeah. And reviews will come with time. Don't feel like you need, 15 or 20 or 200 reviews on your release date. You can let it organically happen. Like you said, it takes time. And careers are not built in an instant. Careers are built over a lifetime. So some of these things you can't rush, and you just have to let them roll out. And then I just want to have a quick note also on blurbs. Don't be shy and don't be afraid to ask. The worst thing they can do is say no. And that's where you just have to get over your own fear and ask some of your favorite authors to blurb your book, or ask people that, might scare you a little bit to talk to or scare you to have them read your writing. Just ask, because that was something that really floored me. Is I got the gumption to ask one of my favorite writers, Matthew Dickman, to review my book, and he did. And so that's on the cover. And I'm just like, I can't even believe this man read my book, much less loved it, and gave me this amazing blurb. So just don't be afraid to ask. I know it's going to be a little scary, but all you need is 10 seconds of courage to send that email, send that DM, ask your favorite authors.
Absolutely. I remember there was one poet that I really respected who I reached out to, and I said, I was almost apologizing for sending the email, and then she responded, "Don't apologize. I was a poet who was publishing their book for the first time, who had was afraid to even ask anybody. So if they don't return the favor, it's most likely they just don't have the time." So I did ask A.E. Stallings, an amazing poet who I've interviewed on my podcast, and she gracefully said, I just don't do blurbs anymore. I'm just so busy with essays and this and that and the other. And that's okay. Fine. That's fine. It had nothing to do with me. And I think that's like in general with poetry or with publishing in general, you're going to get 98% of the time rejected for submitting a poem. That's normal. Nothing wrong with that. There's nothing bad about that. It has usually nothing to do with you or the quality of your poetry. And actually, Morgan had a challenge. What was the challenge? 100 rejections or something like that? I don't remember.
100 giant, life-changing asks this year, where you're trying to get 100 rejections of like big, life-changing, amazing things, because by the time you've counted off 100 of these things, you're guaranteed to get like 5 or 6 of them. And there you go. You've got 5 or 6 life-changing opportunities completely. So that's what I've been doing this year. And I'm only on like 10, but I've had several yeses. Like I'm going to be, I'll just drop the news. I'm going to be published in Japan's biggest newspaper in May. Yeah, I learned how to write haikus and send in like my first haiku to this newspaper, and they loved it. And so I'm going to be in their golden issue for 7 million people. And that was one of my asks. And I'm like, well, I don't get to tally off a rejection, but that's pretty sweet. So failure is something in this industry. It's so important to embrace as part of the process and just try to tally it off and say, you know what, I've got that under my belt. You just want as many failures as possible, because by the time you get through that, you're going to have so many wins.
Absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of it comes down, I even see this through the podcast that I run, the Beulah Swings Poetry Podcast. Roughly once a month, I have a submitted poetry episode, and as Poet Laureate of Dublin, California, I do a poetry walk where we have 25 poets, 25 businesses with poems and storefronts. I got over 100 submissions for the poetry walk. 75% of them I had to reject.
Mm.
And I would say that there were definitely more than 25 really, really good poems and poets in that list. And so it came down to what would work as a poster and a storefront. Do I have something already like that? There's a subjective element. I wouldn't, for most of the people, there were some things in that 75% I rejected where they were clearly not serious submissions, but the majority were definitely serious. They were people that were waiting to get that acceptance. And so when I hit decline, I felt terrible about it, but I can only choose 25. It's a hard limit. And I think many, and occasionally I will, when I reject something, which normally I don't do, but I will be more specific as to, hey, this really doesn't reflect on the poem. I hope you submit again. Don't read anything into it, just at all. Like literally don't take it as feedback that you can do anything with. It's just, hey, for that particular moment in time, the timing just wasn't right. That's why go for it. Just reset your mindset. I love the 100 rejections goal, because then if you achieve it, you feel good about that. And along the way, pretty guaranteed you'll have a couple things come through, because it's a numbers game.
Yeah.
Ultimately.
Yeah, just reframe rejection. And if you're struggling, because I know we all have those periods where it feels like we just can't get any yeses, in my poetry masterclass that you can join on demand, I have a whole video on rejection where I give you the biggest pep talk of your life. I think at some point I say like, "This is poetry, ride or die," or something like that. Like it's so intense. But you just listen to that and like it'll snap you out of that funk and help you to keep going.
Well, now, Morgan, as we're kind of approaching the 45-minute mark. Why don't we each choose a poem from our book or books and recite it and just give a little interesting backstory about it. So while you're thinking about that, because we didn't prep this, I will read a poem from The Plague Doctor, which I love that cover. Love it. Love that cover. That is particularly been well received at open mics.
Okay. Well,
and then I'll give a little.
I'm going to run and get my book.
All right. And then,
I'll be listening.
Sure. And then there's a little interesting backstory on this poem, which was just an example of just ask and you may receive. She is San Francisco in shades of pink and blue, a painted lady with combat boots and attitude. She wears sweatshirts in summer chilled by salt-soaked fog spilling over evening tides. You might catch a glimpse of her rollerblading across the Golden Gate as you sail beneath suspended steel into Pacific swells. She is portraits in DeYoung, a cable car's clang, a skate bunk sprayed in neon green who runs from bay to breakers or swirls around a rainbow flag on Market Street in June. She is San Francisco, spun with threads of sunset hues and wisps of endless dune. And there you can see the poem in the book laid out with a photograph I took of the extraordinary Golden Gate Bridge. So now here's an interesting story about that poem. That's the poem, by the way, which I did not allow the editor to change even one syllable or letter.
Good on
so you. I'm a follower of the San Francisco Chronicles Total SF podcast, which is sort of a lifestyle celebratory podcast about San Francisco that's run by two journalists. One who's now the Heather Knight, who's the bureau chief of the New York Times for San Francisco bureau chief for the New York Times. And I love their podcast. I just written this poem. I got great response at open mic, so I pinged them, DM'd them to say, I've written this poem that I think might really serve your podcast, and I would love to take just 2 minutes to share it with your audience. And to my shock, within a week, because they had a little opening for the next topic, I think it was like the top 10 things to do in San Francisco, I think was the episode. They said, yeah, you know what? This would be perfect for an upcoming episode. Can we call in tomorrow? Because that's with journalists. Basically, if a journalist says, can you talk to me tomorrow or today, you just say yes, and I don't care what's happening at work, just cancel it. And so then I was on I got recorded and introduced them, got about 2 minutes. They asked me a few questions. I recited the poem. They loved it. And then it went out on this episode. and then I had this connection. And then I don't know, 8, 9 months later, I pinged them with something else they were working on, and they said about this book, actually, saying, "Hey, I got this new book. I could share a poem or two if you're interested. If you ever do an episode about live music venues in the Bay Area." And they said, then again, they said, "Hey, you know what? Our guest had a life emergency, and could you come on and be our guest for the full 30 minutes and share a couple poems from your upcoming book, because we're doing an episode about live music in San Francisco." Poof. That
Awesome.
all started because I just took a chance and DM'd a couple of journalists at the SF Chronicle. Like, the worst thing that happens is they say no or they don't reply at all, and it's just part of your 100 rejections list. But instead, it led to me having direct contacts with the bureau chief, the San Francisco bureau chief of the New York Times, who I can DM on a regular basis about this, that, and the other thing. I would say you just never ever know what's going to happen from a just a simple, respectful ask.
Right. Yeah, that's so beautiful. And you have to trust that the doors that open for you are the doors that are meant for you. So, like that opportunity, it opened for you. And then the doors that don't, that's okay. They're just not meant for you.
Yeah.
And you never know when they do open where they'll lead. So, that's beautiful.
So share, since now you have your beautiful book in your hand. So share your beautiful book, which I just love the cover. Barefoot and
Oh,
Running.
there's the
Beautiful
Colorado
book.
Book Award. Um,
Colorado Book Award. Most
yeah.
exciting thing. That's so cool.
Yeah, it's just a little chat book, but it's the little book that could. Um, it's my proudest achievement. But I'm trying to decide if I read The Pine to Pinocchio, which was published in Italy, in Florence recently.
Mm.
It's awesome. Or The Current Scene in My Childhood Home, which is in this book. You know what? Pine to Pinocchio.
Yeah,
Let's do something new.
I love that poem. That's a great choice.
Oh, beautiful. I think I've read this for you before, and I like started crying at the
Oh,
end
you did.
last
You
time.
completely lost it. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
In a
like
good way.
it was just like, oh, I had just written it. And it's so emotional. And this Pine to Pinocchio poem is about the pine in Italy, in actual Florence, Italy, which is where this Pinocchio legend originates from hundreds of years ago. The pine speaking to Pinocchio about them kind of coexisting, and what it means to like be alive and to have life. So here we go. The Pine to Pinocchio. I was silent in the wind once, just hills, just mist with dawn, just sky. There was not a thing you could have told me, not a thing I could have said back. But that tender bud of loss blooms for each one of us in its own time. This one is yours, this one mine. From branches to breath is the only way to find the knowing, to learn the kind hand of a father, to lose him, all the same. My grain has been sanded, smoothed into skin. You've been made and remade again and again, which is to say, I've been remade as a soul is to a body, unable to ever separate, even without feet, no knee, one hand, a mouth that closes when it shouldn't, then cries out too late. To be real is to be missing pieces, but to be all hope still. To believe love is just through this grove of olives, waiting with a mallet, some screws, waiting for you to come home. To feel the warm stir of sun in Tuscany is to understand. There are moments where the world decides itself without you. The role of an ocean to a puppet, the sharp face of an axe to bark. Our lives splits into only two shapes at the end. The joy we gave birth to, and the joy we never had the chance. Yeah.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
So beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank everybody for taking time on St. Patrick's Day with Morgan and me to hopefully learn a couple of things that inspired you about self-publishing. There are lots of resources available on VelousWings.com. The first probably 10 articles I wrote a couple of years ago were all about my self-publishing journey. If you DM Morgan, she will send you a PDF of her experiences. Of course, I hope you check out our books and all the places. That's not what this is about. But hey, you know what? Never be shy about promoting your books. That's another takeaway. And with that, everybody have a wonderful day. And thank you, Morgan, for joining me on this today.
Thanks for having me. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I'm open for questions, of course, and DM me, and I'll give you that PDF. Thank you. This was a beautiful conversation.
Likewise, if you have follow-ups, please feel free to DM me, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.